Good afternoon, and welcome to the Help to Adjust podcast with Don Sinkfield. That's me, your host. Today, I have a guest that is very special to me. She's a friend, a sister, someone who I love. But besides the personal aspect, there is an illustrious history in education. Started off as a teacher, became a principal, then an award-winning principal, then a deputy superintendent, now the superintendent of Bronx High Schools. I would like you to meet educator extraordinaire, Fia Davis.
Good afternoon. How are you? Love the intro. Thank you. I'm like, is that my life? Oh, yeah, that's my life. Yeah, that's right. Thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
I'm so happy that you are here. We try to get people here who have something to say, something that people can learn from, that's interesting and impactful. And I think what you've done at the very least is something that everybody can get important information and insight from. So, when you started off as a teacher, even then you were interested in and actually did a interdisciplinary approach to English, where performance was involved. Talk about what your philosophy on art performance and how it relates to education.
So, as an English major, I'll take you back. We mostly studied the dead white men, right? And when I became a teacher at 22 years of age, and I looked at my students in East New York, Brooklyn, I needed to make English and the study of language and literature beautiful and exciting for them. But I also needed to make it relatable. And I didn't have the vocabulary about equity centered or anti racist literature or any of that. I just knew if they could connect and relate and bring it into their lives, then it would be meaningful and they could see the beauty in Zora Neale Hurston's Their Eyes Are Watching God, or the beauty in William Shakespeare, if you could see that the themes are timeless, in Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird, or in The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. So art was the medium to do that. If I wanted them to study poetry, while their English regions might be centered on white writers, I could make them learn through hip hop, right? Through movies, through making it jump up, look like them, sound like them, feel like them. And so art is a medium for expression. Art is a medium for connection. And it's the only universal language. And so I would use music and film and plays and any type of performance to make it relatable. I remember teaching English once, and a student who Gabriella, and her brother, they were both students at our school. I shared a poem by Maida Del Valle, a poet, Puerto Rican poet from Chicago, and it was called Mommy's Making Mambo. And my Latina student said, Miss Davis, it was like you see us, like you saw our lives. And that for me, that's what art does. It helps you connect to the authentic experience of students, of teachers, of educators. And when people feel seen, heard, and affirmed, they feel loved.
In therapy, we often say people need to be seen, heard, and believing what they say makes a difference. And that's really reflective of what you're talking about, because if your students don't see themselves in the classroom, in the literature that they're reading, it would, I could see, and I see personally how it would make you feel like you're studying something that's foreign to you and not a part of you. How did you first get the inspiration to get into education? And was it something that was foreign to you, or was it something that was part of your family?
It's in my blood and in my bones, Dawn. So it's funny. My aunt Diane Davis, who is my godmother, retired, having been an educator for I think 34 years. And when I was a little girl, I would sit at her feet and she would help me. She would let me help her grade papers, like if there was a matching part or something I could count and check off for her. She would let me help. And when she knew I could do it, she would make me help. And I have another aunt, my Aunt Pat, who was an early childhood educator and loved reading. But for me, the love affair with words and with literature began with my grandmother, who I have very clear memories of sitting in her lap and seeing my little hand and her big hand follow the word as she taught me to read at 5 years old. And so I fell in love. And it was always teach or perform. Like I was very clear, 16 years old, my favorite teacher, Miss Garcia. Shout out to you, Christine Garcia. I think it's Matson now is her new married last name. But she was herself. She loved us. She could see us. And I remember thinking, I think I could do that. Like I think I could be me and make a living, a good one, and be a teacher. And so that's how I came to the journey. And I thought I would only teach for a few years, and I wanted to go to Harvard and study linguistics with, at the time, Dr. Henry Louis Gates, I believe, was there. And I forgot. I fell in love with teaching and forgot all about that plan.
That's how it goes sometimes.
Yeah.
So, from being a teacher, you learned, I'm sure, that you truly connect with students.
Yeah.
And then you became a principal, and at that point you were still around your students a lot, although not in the classroom. But then you went into a higher level of administration. You went into the superintendent's office. How was that change for you?
So you mentioned I currently serve as superintendent of Bronx High Schools Districts 8, 10, and 11. And I'm accountable for 38 high schools. And so we're 38 schools, 38 pathways to graduation, to college, and to career. And as a principal in my last school, shout out to Pathways College Prep in Queens, I had the honor of becoming a part of the National Con Fellowship for Distinguished Principals. And as a Con Fellow, it really makes you expand your perspective, what you see as possible for yourself, for your leadership. And it was clear to me at that point that I needed to, what I call, jump out the window into district leadership. And I had the opportunity to be a deputy superintendent in the Bronx and learn so much. I learned what it meant to be a great number two. I learned the power and the need for relationships as a district leader. And most importantly for me, district leadership was about expanding my impact. I understand that I'm called to serve. I know what it is to impact 600 children. But what if these gifts that I hold, right, might impact thousands of children? And so today as superintendent, I'm accountable for over 19,000 children. And I claim every last one. So my work now is to impact leaders so that they impact teachers, so that we all collectively can impact our children.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. I went to high school right here in New York. I think that you're kind of a high school snob because you're very proud of the fact that you went to Hillcrest.
The legendary Hillcrest High School. Shout out to all Hillcrest alum wherever you are. I see you. I love you. Our chancellor went to Hillcrest High School too.
Yeah. I went to Springfield Gardens High School, and I can think back on having teachers who I think were caring people, but there was not a lot of teachers that looked like us, and the material and the way they exposed it to us in the law class that I had, in some of the English and social studies classes that I had, it really wasn't very relatable in terms of who I saw and the stories that we heard. in my senior year, I had a teacher, Miss Lawson, who kind of brought it to life more and did bring in, don't remember the books at this moment, but brought in some books that had quote unquote us in them, and it made a difference.
Yeah.
So that is wonderful.
If I may,
Yeah.
representation matters. It matters. I know that when I walk in a room as my whole black self, unapologetically me in my voice and my vernacular, I might be in a tailored dress, a statement necklace, and some Jordans, because that's who I am. I know that what it says to young men and women who look like me, oh, I could do that. That she sounds like me. Where she grow up, South Jamaica, Queens. Oh, I could do that. So representation matters. And I always say to, the students who look like me, who connect to my identity, and to those who don't as well, I'm saving a seat for you, right? I heard my good friend, our former chancellor, Misha Ross Porter, talk about that. She was like, to little girls who look like me, I'm saving a seat for you. And so as superintendent, I know what it means that it's me.
Oh yeah.
I know what it means that this is a choice they made. And when I speak and I have opportunity to hold space and share my message with people, I tell them, thank you for being with me and for experiencing me as my whole black self. Because I bring that to every place, to every space. And if you invite me, you better know that you get my head, my heart, and my mouth.
Absolutely. I mean, time and again, I have talked to people about how we were raised in the 80s and 90s. We were really raised with a very risk averse philosophy. Get a
Yep.
city job. You can have a pension, and you will be safe to retire in peace after you put in 30 years, or whatever it is. And in one way, that makes so much sense that we who came from sharecropping after slavery to most, if you look in the 1930, 1940, maybe even after the census, most black women were domestics. Our forefathers were just happy to get a union job, and so we kind of learned
Yeah.
what our career path could or should be based on them being informed by that. And what you said was very powerful, because when young people, I think one of the biggest fears of young people now is that they will be forced into some kind of existence that
Yep.
is less than satisfactory because they're not able to be themselves.
Yeah.
And the fact that you're at this point in your career, leading a district full of schools. How many students did you say?
Over 19,000.
Over 19,000 students that are under your charge. I mean, it's wonderful that you're able to be yourself, and I think you're showing a lot of people, young people, and just across the board, people that you can be you and do something very important.
Absolutely. It's interesting. I think young people today fear what we were taught was safe and secure. They have an aversion to,
Yeah.
you want me to tuck away and do the same job for 30, 40 years when, as the descendants of sharecroppers, who became factory workers and domestics and then got the opportunity to have union city jobs, that was the dream.
Right.
You could buy a home, raise your family, send your children to college, or make sure that they were upright adults who could take care of themselves and get jobs that they too would hold for 30, 40 years. And then you get to our generation, and then the generation after us, who I think taught us a lot
Yeah.
about you get to choose. You get to be yes and. And I think it's so important. I serve in the brownest borough in New York City, right? BX, stand up. I love you. I see you. And I'm a queen from Queens who chooses the Bronx. But what's so important is there are different ways to prosperity, right? Different avenues. Education, of course, is the key, right? I want them to elevate their righteous minds. But there's yes and you can choose a career. I'm an educator, an actor, a speaker, an executive coach. Like I'm all of those things. I'm my whole black self as I do it. I don't and I want them to hold to their identity, to their voice, to their language. If English is not first, hold to your language and then do whatever you need to do to make a lane for yourself that rings true to you, to your identity and to your purpose. And I'm a believer, so for me, I understand that I'm called to serve. I tried to run from educational leadership and I feel like God was like, no, no, no. No. Go on back and sit down. I got some other work for you to do. And you about to do this good transformational leadership work that I didn't even give you yet. And so sometimes when it feels like, I'd love for people to know that when it feels like you want thing A, right? And somehow you keep having to do thing B, that maybe there is work for you or a blessing for you in this other thing. And your work isn't finished over there. And you might find a whole new world and a whole new lane for yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, at one point, you were my boss when you were the principal of the Urban Assembly School for Performing Arts. And
hey, UA.
That's right. Shout out to Urban Assembly for Performing Arts.
Love y'all forever.
And I was at a turning point during that period where I got licensed in mental health and wanted to explore. And, going out and exploring a new path is brave. But it's very important. And I would just mention my own father. I never told him that I was leaving my full-time job because he would have thought that
you
I
had
was
lost your
that
mind.
I had lost my mind.
Your entire mind.
Right. There's no other way to put it. So, for those people who are watching who you're thinking about exploring something else, that was wonderful how you put it. You can be this and. I mean, when you were a principal, I remember you also being an actor and performing in an off-Broadway play and doing a variety of things that people would say, oh, that person is a teacher or that person's a principal. Yes, you can do both.
Yeah. You can do everything you want to do. You just have to figure out what's important to you. And of course, figure out how to take care of yourself. Like what's going to give you your freedom financially, right? And whatever that means to you. And I would also offer, there is no comparison, right? Your lane, your journey is yours. And what I want all of our students in high school to understand is choose your pathway, right? For me, it was college and these multitude of degrees, right? I'm almost done with my doctorate. And in the choices I've made, Dr. Davis will have access to rooms and places and spaces, right?
Correct.
And so I feel like my doctorate, my good friend, Dr. Ashina Baez says, getting your doctorate is an extension of your freedom papers and that you owe your ancestors completing your doctorate. And so that I carry that in my heart. But for our young people, I was talking to a young man at a school this week and I said to him, he's a senior. And I said, what do you want to do? And he was like, college or trade school. I could tell he hadn't figured it out yet. He wasn't clear. And I said, which one do you think you'll love? And he said, trade school. And we talked more about why. And then he said, being an electrician. And I said to him, you could make more money than I do as a master electrician. Like way more. And I'm an educational executive. And he said, really? And I said, absolutely. I said, do what you love. What makes your heart sing? What's going to give you freedom? And know that you can also do something else. I am an executive coach and I have a consultancy coached by Fia because I love coaching leaders to achieve their highest potential and to manifest their vision. So what's possible is everything.
Right.
And that's my message to my principals, to my students, to our community. What's possible is everything.
That is a wonderful message, and it's really true. So much you could do with any field that you go into, and then if that's not enough, add something else to it.
Figure it out.
So after this pandemic, you had students home for some time. They came back to school, and there's been a lot of talk about how students really experienced a kind of a form of separation and trauma from being away from their school communities. How do the schools support students in that situation? And is there something intentional that is done for students of color around that?
You know, our work is hearts and minds work, right? It's mental health work, right? And anyone who thinks that they've shown up to be a teacher and their work is to facilitate content has entered the wrong profession. And the pandemic was traumatizing for not just adults, but also, not just children, but also adults. We were all experiencing collective trauma, and it manifests differently. And so, what we've done is be intentional about social emotional learning, about making sure that every child connects to at least one adult in a school, about making sure that there are spaces and places in every school where students know that I can go if I'm in crisis, if I'm struggling, but also working to extend that to our families. If the family is healthy, then the child can be healthy.
Right.
And really thinking about what it means to make school resources that are open to families, or at the very least are in clear partnerships with our families.
Right.
And so making sure that every school has a school counselor, making sure that social workers are resources, that we're in partnership with community-based organizations that offer mental health support. I'm really proud that at Pathways, where I was most recently a principal, we had a mental health center that did home visits, that also met with families in our school. So in school, we had the resources to support the wellness of not just our children, but our families. And children can't truly be healthy if their families aren't healthy, if their families aren't well. You know, the ultimate question is, and how are the children, right? Are they well? And making sure that their mental health is well is so key.
Yeah.
You know, a hungry baby can't learn, but a baby who's afraid or in crisis or hurting and doesn't know what to do with that can't learn either. And so we have a responsibility to be intentional about mental health practices, about teaching them to deal with stress. I believe deeply in restorative practices, about healing our community through the power of a circle and being restored. I think all of those things are important for children and for adults. And we continue to believe that. And then the other part, serving in the brownest borough in New York City, I'm committed to equity-focused, anti-racist leadership and being intentional about calling out institutional racism, making sure that our students see themselves in our curriculum, in the classrooms, in the images that are up and around their school, in the text that they read, in the music that's played. You need to find yourself in the classroom. And teachers who don't look like them, which many of our teachers don't, our work is to help them learn. Dr. Chris Emden, another friend of mine, wrote, for white folks who teach in the hood and the rest of y'all too. Right? There's work for, if you come to teach in an urban setting, in a black and brown community, and you are a white teacher, there's work for you to do to step into their culture, to honor it.
Absolutely.
And I believe that you have to love them to teach them, and you have to love them to lead them. And so making sure that you understand who your children are, who your leaders are, for me, is an act of love, an act of service, and a part of my responsibility.
Oh, that's beautifully said. I mean, there is that's revolutionary in
Thank you.
itself. Because having having white allies is the only way that progress is made ultimately. Because otherwise, it's us against them, and that's not what we're looking for. We're looking to in all kind of systems in the healthcare system, in the education space and technology. People need to know that as there is this gulf between people of color being there at the level that they should, that the way we bridge this gap or this gulf is by being conscious of it and using equity minded policy and daily procedure.
I think you said a key word. You said policy, right? A saying I have is follow the bag, right? If it doesn't make sense, follow the bag. And the bag is the money. If
Right.
it does make sense and it worked well, follow the bag. What they do with the money. And so policy is always connected to money. And the key to maximizing the experience for children and for adults and for our allies is to make sure that policy is aligned with our equity centered practices in service to our children. And if you look at this, the statistics for New York City public schools, right, the lion's share of our children are black and brown.
Right.
And so making sure that our policies are in service to making sure we educate all of our children at the highest levels. In every neighborhood, in every zip code, in every place, screened or unscreened, specialized or not, they all deserve the highest level of education and one that relates to them. They deserve to see teachers who look like them and who don't, but all who love them and who are there to serve them.
Yeah. I really believe that part of the high dropout rate of the 1980s and early 90s had a lot to do with the word that you mentioned, which if kids are afraid or if there's fear, schools were not really safe places in many cases at that time. And there were kids who just opted out. And we would imagine that they're dropouts because of some kind of academic failure or, oh, this was a kid who was influenced wrongly. But in many cases, they were just afraid because something was happening at their school. I mean, I even saw things in high school that I believe could have made other kids say, I'm not coming back here, and that I think is so important to make schools safe places
Yeah.
physically and emotionally,
Yeah.
because that's where you get learning. Because it's like Maslow's hierarchy,
Exactly. I was going to
right?
say that. Yep.
Yeah, if you don't have the food, clothing, shelter, safety, there's no way you're gonna be able to deal with concepts like love and justice and self-actualizing. Yeah.
You are correct. You know, it's funny. I never felt unsafe in school. But I remember seeing the news at that time. I was a student during the times you're describing, but I never felt unsafe. I felt loved and celebrated. I mean, we joke about my high school, but I really felt loved and affirmed and seen. And certainly I had some teachers who didn't understand us, right, or see us. But I also had like my favorite teacher who I mentioned, Miss
Yeah.
Garcia, who did things like she was our cheerleading coach and took us on trips and did all these amazing things with us. And we still connect with her on Facebook, and I've run into her at a Broadway play. And so I didn't experience that, but I know that we have to have schools that are environments where our children feel safe and they know that their needs are met. It's why during the pandemic, keeping schools open for food, the buildings I'm talking about, to make sure that kids got
I
meals.
remember that. Yeah.
It was critical. There are kids who wouldn't have eaten, families who may not have eaten. And so our schools are at the center of our communities. In the Midwest, when there is like a storm or they have a tornado that really ravishes a community, the first thing they look to do is reopen school, because schools represent normalcy, and they
Absolutely.
also are a place and a space to keep our children safe.
Absolutely. Yeah. This is good, and I'm encouraged just knowing that many school leaders are under your leadership,
Thank you.
'cause this is what we need. Where do you think education needs to go in the next decade?
That's a great question. So recently in one of my doctoral classes, we've been talking about shout out to Fordham Rose Hill campus in the Bronx, of course. We've been talking about disruptive innovation and really talking about, Blockbuster versus Netflix and what happened to Blockbuster in terms of adaptive leadership and being able to adapt with the times. And so when you ask me about education in the next 20 years, I pray that there is disruptive innovation to education,
I love it.
and that as educational leaders, we are willing to step into places and spaces that might be uncomfortable for us, but they are centered on what's best for children. So, for example, there's a full online school that's been opened that's taking ninth graders and really looking at an opportunity to build an online high school.
New York City Public
In New York
School.
City Public Schools, absolutely, has a principal and everything. However, what if right now there were 10th graders who wanted to be a part of online schools, or 11th graders? Why couldn't we figure out how to adapt, right? So I want in 20 years, New York City to be agile and to be able to adapt with the times and to have multiple pathways, opportunities for students to learn, and for school to be in service to, as I get to high school, I think about who I am and where I am, and I'd like to learn in this way.
Right.
And it's important for me to have a job while I'm learning. So could we adapt and figure out a program where I go to school 3 days a week and I go to work and make money 2 days a week? Right?
Yeah.
I would love for New York City to be agile and be adaptable and to really think about disruptive innovation, where it means that adults have to learn new skills and create new policy in service to the best needs of our students. And I believe that school is the best place for our kids. They're safe, they're happy, they're fed. But I also believe that there are different ways to do it. It doesn't need to look the same way it did in 1935, right?
Absolutely.
And so in 2042, it shouldn't look like it does now. That's what I think about the future.
Yeah, I love that disruptive innovation. You know, there's so many. There's so much that is changing in the world, that how could education not have to adapt
Right.
to the changes that are taking place in the world? Well, I think that we have, hit on so much important stuff, and this conversation is wonderful, and I hope people get a lot from it. Like, subscribe, and share the Help to Adjust podcast, Help to Adjust Counseling on Instagram, Help to Adjust Inc. on Facebook, and Help to Adjust Podcast on YouTube.
You want to follow me and my work? Follow me on Twitter at Davis_Fia, on IG at Coach by Fia. Hit me on LinkedIn. I'm an executive coach, Coach by Fia LLC. Would love to hear from you and support you in manifesting your goals and your dreams.
Peace and love. We will connect soon.